In India's Hindu mythology, situated to the southeast of Persia, there is a demon who is sometimes depicted as being made of sand and possessing the power to control the winds of the desert. While on the other side of Persia, in Arabian folklore, there is an entity that is roughly translated as the sand runner or sand traveler. This is a type of malicious spirit that takes the form of a living sand dune and can move and change shape at will. Could this have been the same creature the Russian officials were now secretly aware of and viewed as a genuine threat? What connects Alexander the Great, Prophet Suleiman, and the Allied incursion into Iran in 1941? The Rig-e Jinn Desert, otherwise known as the Dune of the Jinn. Nicknamed the Bermuda Triangle of the Middle East, this desert is one of the most mysterious yet hostile environments on the planet. In the 1930s, the Austrian geographer Alphonse Gabriel became one of the first explorers to survive traveling across the outer edges of its interior. Then between 1997 and 2005, the Iranian geographer Ali Parsa managed to map large portions of its uncharted areas, seemingly dispelling old Persian myths concerning an extra-dimensional gateway existing at its core, guarded by terrifying eldritch-type creatures. Yet, despite a growing tourism industry in the 21st century based in and around the more accessible areas, large parts of the Rig-e Jinn remains avoided. Because of this, some nomads still speak of terrifying ancient threats that exists within it. From the time of Alexander the Great to the modern age, this threat may not only be a relic from ancient folklore, but something the Russian government might have encountered in the 1940s and have endeavored to keep it hidden from the world ever since. At over 3,800 square kilometers and at the center of the Dasht-e Kouyr, Iran's principal desert, the Rig-e Jinn has a history of paranormal folklore going back centuries. Due to the high frequency of disappearances that have happened here over centuries, the area has developed a feared reputation. Some of its most famous naturally occurring anomalies includes the way the wind that flows through this area often howls like a spirit, and how the stones 30 kilometers from its center have been observed to cry like humans. Even the nomads speak of how their camels refuse to enter this area, and if they do, they'll not stop walking until they've reached its outer edges. While each of these anomalies have a reasonable scientific explanation, the Russian paranormal researcher Paul Stonehill recently shared a remarkable story from the 1940s that goes beyond all possible logic. Stonehill states that sometime after the Soviets made deep incursions into Iran prior to their 1941 offensive, a Russian surgeon, simply referred to as Nikolai, had written about a strange experience he and his team endured while performing a reconnaissance exercise in the Dasht-e Kouyr. During this mission, after their armed vehicle became stranded, they encountered a very large area of sand moving across the desert floor in an unusual manner. According to Nikolai, this mass composed of what looked like millions of sand particles appeared to be alive and exhibiting a basic level of intelligence. Initially not viewing it as a threat, one of the soldiers allowed it to swarm around him, whereupon it completely consumed him, leaving nothing behind except the inorganic items he had on his clothing. Quickly, the remaining officers secured themselves within their vehicle so they could not only protect themselves from what seemed like supernatural sand, but also from an approaching natural dust storm. Unfortunately, once the storm had passed, Nikolai and a surviving officer remained trapped in their vehicle for several days, since attempts to leave would always result in the sand entity approaching them. Shooting it had no effect, so they had no choice but to wait for their comrades to find them. Interestingly, Nikolai noted that while its form appeared to be made up of tiny grains of sand, its mass was a lot more cohesive than it initially appeared, suggesting that it was one single organism and not a multitude of millions acting in unison. This detail is important, and we'll discuss its significance shortly. According to Stonehill, when help eventually arrived, Nikolai immediately lied to the rescue team before they reached his vehicle, stating that the whole area was covered in mines, making it unsafe for them to casually step into the sand. He did this to ensure that the entity would not attack them also. Fortunately, the men were rescued without further incident, but this was just the beginning of their problems. The debriefing process that took several days saw the two survivors immediately separated, and Nikolai fully admit that they were not trapped by mines, but by the living sand. As expected, he was not believed, at least officially. After being continually questioned, eventually he realized his reputation was being damaged, and the only way he could salvage his career would be to say that their encounter with the anomaly was merely a hallucination brought on by the stress of being stranded. However, before he was sent on a new assignment, a senior official confided in him off the record that their superiors actually believed his initial story about flesh-eating sand. However, fearing any future negative repercussions, Nikolai maintained the narrative that he hallucinated the whole experience. To listen to a detailed breakdown of the incident, after you've watched this episode, go to the description box where you'll find a link to Paul Stonehill's channel. Anyway, so assuming this encounter was real, what was this entity that attacked then? Well, we have several options and explanations. Out of the millions of Djinn stories that have been told, both historically and in the modern day across the MENA region, accounts where creatures behave in the manner that the Soviets allegedly encountered in the 1940s are so rare, it's almost practically unheard of, but not completely. One of the earliest known anomalous instances to have manifested itself in the Rig-e Jinn and wider Dasht-e desert is estimated to have occurred several hundred years ago, and is a story that has been transmitted to each generation of the Bedouins living there. Here, the son of one of the residents of the villages on the outskirts of the Dasht-e decided to enter the Rig-e Jinn arena for walking and recreation, but after a few days, he was not heard from. Days later, more disappearances occurred, including camels, and from here, the folklore of the area was born, warning all travelers to stay away from the area unless they want to be taken by the Jinn. At least, this is the story according to some traditions. So, if it was the Jinn, what kind have the ability to turn into sand? In India's Hindu mythology, situated to the southeast of Persia, there is a demon who is sometimes depicted as being made of sand and possessing the power to control the winds of the desert. While on the other side of Persia, in Arabian folklore, there is an entity that is roughly translated as the sand runner or sand traveler. This is a type of malicious spirit that takes the form of a living sand dune and can move and change shape at will. In one story, a Bedouin traveler sets up camp for the night and is suddenly surrounded by a sandstorm. In the morning, he discovers that the sand around him has come alive and taken the form of the sandwalker. which is threatening to swallow him whole. In another story, a group of nomads crossing the desert noticed that a sand dune that seemed to be following them. When they realize it's the Sandwalker, they have to find a way to outwit the entity before it catches up to them. According to legend, this is a dangerous and malevolent creature that can cause harm to all who cross its path, swallowing them whole or draining the life force out of its victim. Our third option is the div or div, which is a type of demon or evil spirit in Iranian folklore. The div is basically your classical jinn that is often depicted as a shapeshifter that can take on many different forms, including that of sand or dust. It's said to torment travelers, cause them harm, and even possess them. In addition to its malevolent nature, it's also often depicted as having a certain degree of cunning, wit, and intelligence. In some tales, the heroes have to outwit the div, not only just using their strength, but also their minds. While it's obvious that this level of intelligence was not evident in the Soviets' encounter, could this have been the same creature the Russian officials were now secretly aware of and viewed as a genuine threat? Well, an alternative theory suggests that it could possibly be a weapon, making it technological and not supernatural. According to Persian folklore, there are oral traditions that state that at the center of the Rig-e Jinn, a gateway to an extra-dimensional paradise exists. Those who successfully find it will also find great wealth. Although local historians have since debunked this story as merely a fable to warn travelers about the dangers of believing in mirages, this lore has led some to believe that this entire area is enchanted, specifically its sand and soil, both of which contain special anomalous properties. Here, there's a rare folk legend that states that Prophet Sulaiman made an actual flying carpet using the sand of the Rig-e Jinn. According to the lore, during the Achaemenid period, the Persians used to search for and transport sand and soil from this area to the city of Kashan in order to build a large garden within it. Some of this material possessed anomalous properties, including the ability to repel gravity. Merchants accidentally learned of this when the garden's silkworms, after feeding on the soil, would eventually produce carpets that could float off the ground. According to some fables, when Sulaiman learned of this, he had one made for him, which took 10 years to weave. However, when Alexander the Great invaded Persia, he became aware of this strange material, and since procuring it for himself would be difficult, he instructed his army to raze all of Kashan's garden and carpet, preventing the Persians from making the carpets again. Of course, most historians dismiss this tale as a fictional story mixed with real-life historical events, noting that a variation of it can even be found in some versions of the 1001 Arabian Nights anthology. That said, assuming that Comrade Nikolai's story is to be believed, could the creatures that had attacked them been some kind of anti-gravity technology derived from the desert's natural elements that was then somehow weaponized? As completely far-fetched as that sounds, it's almost consistent with the fringe theories that states that ancient Persia could have been home to an unbelievable technologies that had since been lost to time, and those technologies were later interpreted as supernatural by future indigenous generations. On the other hand, if it's purely supernatural, could it have been one of the many entities found in either Persian, Arab, or South Asian folklore? What do you think? And are you aware of other creatures like this in your part of the world? Leave your opinion below. This is Karim. Please share, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode, where we'll look at Germany's involvement in the Middle East during this exact same time period, and their mission to find the Djinn King himself.